Welcome to Industry Focus, the podcast that dives into a different sector of the stock market each day. It's Tuesday, December 10th. I'm your host, Jason Moser, and I'm really excited about our guest for today's show. Sophia Moshasha is a director at Brightline, a company focused on the creation of virtual and interactive experiences. She's also the vice president of the DC chapter of the VR/AR Association, and she's also the co-host of the Everything VR and AR podcast, which you can catch wherever you get your podcasts, and I highly recommend that you do. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Okay, Sophia, I like how you guys start your shows with the story of the guest. I mean, that just gives some good context there. So I'm putting you on the other side of the table here. What's your story? Give us an idea of what led you to the work that you're doing today.
That's great. Yeah, thank you for having me. And I'm sure a lot of my listeners would be wondering the same thing, actually. I came from a DoD contracting background. And then I just kind of fell into the technology space. When I first joined Brightline, I had assumed that they would be doing something IT or cyber related since we're in the DC area. And got very excited that they actually did a lot more than that. They do everything from all interactive technologies to include facial recognition, motion capture, object tracking, motion tracking, touch screen, and now interactive VR and AR. And that was kind of an obvious add to their repertoire of interactive technologies. And it's been a fun ride since then. I've been there for about two and a half years. And then we joined the VR/AR Association about almost 2 years ago. They asked us to start the Washington, D.C. chapter just because of the type of work that we were doing in the industry and just how pressed we were to further the education on VR, AR, and MR technologies. Yeah,
I just was consulting the pricing schedule about a membership for the association. I think I've got everybody talked in here to go ahead and cover the membership fee for the DC chapter membership. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But I want to dive into some of the work that you're doing over at Brightline first. In Brightline, correct me if I'm wrong here, but you're in the business of creating virtual and interactive experiences, basically, it sounds like. And I mean, looking over some of the brand clients you have, I mean, Coca-Cola, Geico, Toyota, just to name a few, I mean, it really does seem like, based on what we're watching, the evolution of this technology, it does seem like we're to a point now where the interactive and mixed reality, it's no longer a fad or fancy technology that really doesn't do anything. It really feels like it's gaining traction, and a lot of companies are buying into it. So, I mean, what is the feeling among your customers these days regarding the mixed reality? Do you still have a lot of work to do in convincing them that there's going to be a return on that investment, or is that return on investment really starting to become more apparent now?
I mean, it's definitely a constant educational ploy for everyone in every industry on what the ROI is, and we're continuing to see more of those use cases pop up so we can kind of point them to those. Everybody is certainly interested in how they can utilize a mixed reality technology. And for us, it's a little easier because we already have a big stake in the game as far as what we're doing for our customers now with other interactive technologies, and they would just want to take it a step further. So I always say a big part of our job and anybody in an emerging technology industry is education and consultation. So a lot of times people will come to us either not knowing anything about how mixed reality would apply to them, or they would have an idea of what they want, yet it's kind of totally off. Yeah. And so we kind of work backwards from there, saying, okay, what is your goal here? And then we would let them know what the appropriate use cases are for virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, and how it could augment the way that they're doing business or reaching out to their target audience and affecting the way that they do business. And it's very use case centric. So people will come to us saying VR is cool, we want to do that, and then the next question we ask them is, okay, well, why? And that's how we get to the answers faster and kind of consult them on the best way to utilize the technology. So the ROIs and use cases are out there. Again, it's still a big a big part on us to educate people on the appropriate utilizations of the technology.
It sounds a lot like what we do here in regard to investing. A lot of people come in, they see this notion of investing. I can buy shares of stock in this company and I can sit back and 5 years from now it's going to be worth more money. That's great. Let me get started investing. But then you have to kind of backtrack for a second and say, why do you want to do it? I mean, of course, it's to make money, but really it's about financial goals. It's about what stage in life you're at, about what you're trying to achieve. And so certainly, I mean, that makes sense with companies. They see that cool technology. Yeah, let's do that. But yeah, exactly why do you want to do it in the first place?
And I would say where the industry is at now in terms of creating content for end users and end customers is we're in the prototype proof of concept stages. So there is money out there to be invested in mixed reality solutions. But people are testing, entities and companies are testing the waters right now on how they can apply the technology towards their specific company and industry. So people are spending money out there. And now what we're seeing is not just us as content developers, preaching to the choir of how this could potentially affect, industry, but we're seeing now industry attending these technology conferences with us and actually standing on stage with us, telling the audience how much immersive technology has been a value add to their company.
Where do you think we are in the mixed reality stage? And what I mean by that is, I'm assuming you know about the hype cycle, and you kind of hit that trough of disillusionment where it feels like we've been for a while. Maybe we're starting to realize some real life applications for this technology, whether it's mixed or virtual or augmented or all three. And it feels like, at least judging from my Twitter feed, there's a new headset initiative from another company. It's seeming like every other day. Obviously Microsoft is doing great things with HoloLens too, and we hope to get HoloLens here to be able to fiddle around with that. Apple is obviously throwing their hat in the ring. Google giving it another shot. Facebook has Oculus. But then you have all of these other smaller companies. Magically is another one. Amazon has a company backed. I think they're backing a company called North that's making some stuff. It feels like now there is tremendous buy-in on this, just judging from the hardware that's coming to market. Some of it'll work, some of it won't. But based on the content that you're producing, the content that's in demand, do you feel like we're on that sort of way back up? It feels like now we're at that stage where there's buy-in and we're slowly but surely going to keep on doing nothing but I think improving from here. But I could be wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. The military is one of the biggest spenders of immersive technology capabilities.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great tell as to where the industry is going with immersive technology.
And what do you think about the service that I run here is focused primarily on augmented reality. But we know there's mixed reality, there's virtual reality, there's augmented reality. To me, the more and more I learn about this space, the more I follow it, the more it seems like the lines are getting blurred. And it seems like it's not one or the other, it's all of them, and they're working together. So, are we headed towards a future where it really is, it's less about augmented versus virtual, and it's really all about just mixed and interactive?
Yeah, I think that first of all, there's space for everything right now. Yeah. It's not a competition. And like I said before, it's very use case driven. There are times when AR is most appropriate, and there's times when VR is most appropriate, depending on what you're trying to achieve, and also depending on where the software development is at those stages. And then, the hardware as well is a big key to this, obviously. And in my opinion, AR is the tortoise in the race right now, although I do think that it does have longevity in terms of where it's going. But then, yes, you're right. Mixed reality is going to be like the coin term for all of this. Yeah. And companies like Vario, I don't know if you've heard of them yet, but they're doing some incredible things, kind of bringing that to light.
Yeah, it's you talk about educating and AR maybe being the tortoise in the race right now. It's funny. My father, he's a physician. He's 77, I think now, still practicing. And I was talking to him about mixed reality and virtual and augmented. He's like, I think I know what virtual reality is, but he's like, what's augmented reality? And I'm explaining to him, it's digital overlaying the real world. And then he's like, well, how could that help me? And I start having a little bit of a challenging time really explaining particular real life examples. It's easier for me to Google like a video on YouTube and show him how the healthcare industry is being impacted by augmented reality. But yeah, I mean, it certainly felt like from the very get-go, virtual reality is the one that's always been at the tip of everybody's tongue. And I guess that's just because of the wow factor with the technology. But it really, to me, it does seem like those lines are getting blurred, and more it's about that mixed reality, that interactive, as opposed to one versus the other. Let's switch gears for a minute. I want to talk to you a little bit about your journey in the tech world. Yesterday, I had the very good fortune to speak with Caroline Feeney. She's the CEO of Individual Solutions at Prudential. Now, this is Prudential, right? That's finance, and we're talking about tech here, but you have some similarities then, and our conversation centered around the evolving role of women in finance. And we've seen, I think, over the past several years, really awareness. We've seen traction. More and more, we're discovering how important it is that we give women their due in these industries. I mean, you play a very important role. And, I mean, equality, I think, is really at the forefront of almost every industry now. But it hadn't always been that way. How has your work history, how has your journey been as a woman in tech? I mean, is there a notable difference between where you started versus where you are now? That's
a good question. Absolutely. I do not have a technology background. Okay. And I think we're seeing more and more of that, particularly in this space, or at least the people that I've talked to. And it's really interesting, the unique perspectives that they bring to the industry. Some of them obviously have gotten into more of the technological roles. But me, I have a background in marketing and strategy. And that's what really interested me, is how can we apply the technology to particular use cases in particular industries. And I think it's important for everyone, not just women, but everyone to kind of understand that there is a place for them in immersive technology. We think about it not as just a new technology, but a new form of communication, a new medium of communication. So if we think about it like that, I mean, there's roles for everybody in this space. And it's been interesting for me because it is particularly male dominated. But because of that, I've been afforded a lot of opportunity as well. So I think it's both a challenge, but a blessing at the same time.
Is there anybody in particular that lit the way for you? Someone that maybe mentored you? Was there someone that you kind of look back to and think, wow, that person really helped pave the path for me? Or
I would say people that have become good friends of mine are Amy Peck from Endeavor VR, and now heads enterprise at HTC, and then Kathy Hackle, who leads enterprise for Magic Leap. She's a big voice in the technology, named one of the top voices in LinkedIn, so kudos to her. And they're just very supportive. Not only them, but I've seen the industry at large, and then particularly the women, just be very, very supportive, which is very new to me. And I think, generally speaking, people just want to see the technology succeed. Yeah. And because of that, everybody is just giving a leg up for everyone else. And it's really inviting and really nice to see that.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to lie. I'm the father of daughters. I have a 13-year-old and one that's getting ready to turn 15. And I think about this stuff all the time. I feel like they're entering a time in their lives where there's going to, the world is your oyster. It is probably a bit cliche, but I think there are a lot of opportunities opening up now and mentalities that perhaps didn't exist even 10 years ago that are going to make a big difference for them as they enter the workforce over the next decade. So it sounds like finance, tech. I mean, it really does sound like the attitude is shifting everywhere you look. Let's talk a little bit about your role as vice president of the DC chapter of the VR AR Association, and as the co-host of the Everything VR and AR podcast. I don't know where you find the time to do all this, but listen, I've listened to a lot of your shows. I've enjoyed learning a lot, and you have some great guests there, and I encourage our listeners to check that out. Who are some of the guests or the industry experts that you've had on your show that you just thought, wow, that just sparked an interest in something I didn't know about before, or I want to learn more about what they were telling us about on the show? I mean, you got to have one or two guests that just made you think, wow, what a great interview. Anyone come to mind?
I mean, first of all, let me say that almost everybody, pretty much everybody on our podcast has had some amazing stories and are creating some major impact in our industry.
We have such a wonderful cross section of guests on the show.
Right.
It's not just VR hardware. I mean, you got car companies and software companies and everywhere in between. Right,
and we wanted to make sure that we were hitting home with all types of listeners, not only the people that were creating the content and some of the main members, I would say, of our association, but also the people who are looking for use cases to point to and say, okay, well, these guys are doing it and they're doing some really cool things with it, and here's their story. And it's not us touting about it anymore. Like these end clients and implementers are the ones that are raving about the technology. So it feels really good to be able to host them. And I would say one person in one conversation in particular would be somebody by the name of Gabriel Rene, who is one of the founders of the Spatial Web Foundation.
Oh, I haven't listened to that one, but I do remember I remember that one.
You should. He has a book out on Amazon. It's both audio. The audio will come out in about a month now, but he also has a paperback book. And if you haven't read it, I really encourage you to read it. And it'll kind of open your mind as to, why we're putting such a heavy focus on immersive technology and kind of all the peripherals around it, the Internet of Things, and he talks about robotics and blockchain and why all of these things are important and kind of coming together to create what we call like an immersive ecosystem.
There was one interview you had with an individual from Microsoft. I can't remember which interview it was, but it led me down a rabbit hole, and then I discovered Julia Schwartz with Microsoft and a YouTube video that she had with a HoloLens 2 demo from earlier in this year. And the demo is just really cool. I mean, that's just what I'm like, I got to get a hold of this HoloLens because it just sounds like you can do so much cool stuff
Come
with
to our office. We got you.
Do you have one?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I consider that an invitation then. But another one that I listened to recently, the interview with Ross Finman from Niantic. Right. And I guess he actually was the co-founder, am I pronouncing it correctly, Escher?
Right.
Yeah, and so he which that was acquired by Niantic, but now he's the head of AR strategy at Niantic. And Niantic is a company I've had on my watch list here for the service because I'd love to see it go public at some point or another. I think a lot of folks, they know Niantic because of Pokemon Go and the Harry Potter Wizards Unite game. And I think those are games that just scratch the surface of the potential there with AR on the consumer side. But again, I mean, it goes so well beyond the consumer. You have just such a great cross section of guests there. That's just what's always really impressed me. What are some of the markets that you feel like are big opportunities for mixed reality, whether it's augmented or virtual mixed reality? But when we're talking about the markets, and I think a lot of our listeners, they probably think, well, it's entertainment, it's gaming, it's consumer-related stuff. The one thing I've really had a lot of fun on my service is discovering all of these markets that really benefit from the technology, even though it may not necessarily be consumer-facing. And
right.
A great example, I think, is healthcare. You see what these physicians are doing with this interactive reality software and hardware, and it's just phenomenal. Are there any markets that stand out to you as just big opportunities that you're excited about? I
mean, I would first say that, us being knees deep in the market, we have to understand where the market is now and then where it's going. Because where it's going is maybe not where we should focus our efforts now.
Okay.
So, it may not be consumer facing other than the gaming industry, and that's okay. But it's important for us to know that so we can gauge where to put our efforts. So for us, it's basically any industry that has a big focus on training, right? Where are they going to receive the biggest value in reducing the time to retrieve, retain, and then deploy information? So, healthcare is a big industry for that. Military is a big industry. And then I would also say, or oil and gas, some of these industries also, it's hard to train. It's hard, or it's impossible to train for some of these circumstances because it's dangerous, or they don't have access all the time, and those types of things. And immersive technology can create that access. And then the other thing I would say is visualization. So anything that will reduce the time to do mock-ups, builds, and
simulation type stuff.
Simulation type stuff. So I'll give an example. So Bell Helicopter, their usual process is to do a mock-up like CAD drawing, right? And then once those specs are okay, they do a mock build of the helicopter. And then they'll have their pilots sit in the helicopter and just make their remarks about what they like and what they don't like, and the engineers are kind of taking their notes on that. Right. Then they'll go back to the drawing board, re-mock that up, and then rebuild, and then do this process over and over again until they have something tangible that they like, and then they'll go and produce it. Whereas now with virtual reality, they're doing their visual mock-up inside VR and then putting their test pilots in VR inside the cockpit. And then in real time, they're making adjustments based on the recommendations of the engineer or of the pilot, and then they go into production. So it's reducing costs, reducing time, all of those things to get a plane or a helicopter into production.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because there's a company that I added to the service a little while back, and you may have heard it, you may not. It's called Ansys, and it's a simulation software company. I mean, they build simulation software, big presence in academia, so a lot of students are actually being trained on this software before they're even getting out of the workforce. And I mean, if you're trained on that software when you get out of the workforce, they don't want to retrain you, so they're trying to get people, they're making sure that they're getting that Ansys software out into the workforce so that they just continue on. But another thing, you were talking about training, and I worked in a different life. I worked for a while at Travelers Insurance, and I worked at Bank of America as a loan officer, and there was training involved with those jobs. And I can remember the web-based, go to this web page and click these buttons and do this and that training, and it was boring and it was tedious, and but now you're seeing where this augmented reality and virtual reality is taking over. It's making training a little bit more palatable. It's certainly more effective. In companies, I think companies out there like PTC, another one that is building out that software and those experiences for training. That's really cool.
I'll tell you about a cool study that's been put out. So it's not only use cases; it's companies like Microsoft who are, doing intense studies on the ROI of this technology. So they put out something called the Class of 2030, and it's available for download for anybody who wants to view it. So what they did is they put two sets of students, university students, in traditional lecture-based learning environment, and then immersive technology learning. And they set a minimum standard of comprehension for those sets. And what they found was that the set that was in the immersive training, the immersive learning environment, reached that minimum standard 60% faster at one letter grade higher than traditional based learning.
So, I mean, it strikes me, and I mean, again, this goes back to some of these markets where we feel like they're just these big opportunities. I mean, education clearly. I mean, from higher education all the way down to elementary school. I mean, this is technology, I think, that will continue to take over. I mean, I've read case studies where grade school classes have augmented reality experiences that put them in the middle of the Civil War,
right,
where they're seeing sights and smelling smells and feeling impacts of things that you would not. I mean, it provides context that none of us ever really grew up with. I mean, to me, that's not surprising, the result that you say, but it's really encouraging that that data exists, because I think it'll only hasten the move towards this.
Right, and it not, even though it came out from the educational sector of Microsoft, I mean, it just showcases the power of the technology in totality, right? And what it can do for other industries that are looking to educate or deploy information faster and have people resonate with it faster. So what traditional forms of communication do is provide more of like a semantic memory, right? Yeah. So semantic memory is more of memorization. Words on a page, things you're listening to, hearing people talk, even videos and pictures, those types of things. And then what immersive technology is doing is building more episodic memory. So that is lived experiences. So memorizing something is different from creating a memory. And that is exactly what immersive technology is doing, and that's what makes it so powerful.
And it makes perfect sense. I mean, it makes perfect sense. One of the things about your jobs, and I'm using the plural there.
That's right.
It seems like your jobs afford you the opportunity to go to a lot of these industry events. I mean, and that's part of what you all do there, I think, at Brightline is helping with those industry events to a degree. But what you were just at the Microsoft Ignite event down in Florida, I think it was.
Yep.
Give us a little insight as to how that was. What were some of the highlights?
Yeah, it was great. Microsoft actually invited us to come down there and interview some of their keynotes that were doing things with immersive technology. Surprisingly, there wasn't as much of an influence of immersive technology or showcase of immersive technology there on the conference show floor. You kind of had to hunt for it. And some of the people that I met at the bars, engineers coming there for CLEs or whatnot, they didn't even know anything about VR or AR, or the fact that they knew the term HoloLens, but that was about it.
Interesting.
So I took some time to blow their minds a little bit about the technology, and got them to want to learn a little bit more through Microsoft. So I think Microsoft is doing a good job of being one of the leaders in the technology, but it works a lot like their mixed reality department works a lot like a startup in a large business. So they're still fighting the same struggles that we are as small businesses in the industry. So it's interesting to be able to lead that charge with them.
That's cool. Have you ever been down? Have you been to the Augmented World Expo?
I actually have not. No. I actually attend more industry-focused conferences, and we bring the technology expertise to those conferences. So apart from the VR AR Global Summit that I attend every year, I attend mostly industry-focused conferences and bring the tech to them. Nice.
Well, I think I've sweet-talked the powers that be here into letting me go this year. So if I don't see you there, then I will circle back with you when I return, and we'll
please do.
You go over some notes, and maybe we'll meet back in the studio and talk again and catch up.
That sounds great.
All right. Well, you can catch her co-hosting the Everything VR and AR podcast. You can follow her on Twitter at Sophia Mosh. Sophia Moshasha, thanks so much for coming in this week.
Thank you for having me.
As always, people on the program may have interest in the stocks they talk about, or the Motley Fool may have formal recommendations for or against. So don't buy or sell stocks based solely on what you hear. Today's show is produced by Dan the Homeowner Boyd. For Sophia Moshasha, I'm Jason Moser. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.